Hello, everybody, from the Meditation for Aikidoka 9-month continuity program. Miles Kessler here. I'm happy to be having another Dharma discussion, this time with Dr. Aviva Berkovich-Ohana, who is a research scientist here in Israel. I guess you're out of Bar Ilan University or Weizmann Institute or
No, I'm
Haifa.
already at the Haifa
Haifa
University.
University. She's done some of her research in the Bar Ilan and also the Weizmann Institute. And I know Aviva because I was part of her study. She rounded up all the meditators in Israel, and it was really fun. You know, as a meditator, I really enjoyed being part of it. And we got to plug our brains into fMRIs, and also, what was it, an EEG as well?
Yeah, you are one of those who had everything. You had the EEG, the MEG, and the fMRI.
Great. And I enjoyed every moment of it. So, anyways, it was quite a pleasure to be part of this research. And for this 9-month course, for these Dharma discussions, I've been speaking mostly with meditation teachers about meditation, different types of meditation, their benefits, etc. But what's unique about what I'm excited about speaking with Aviva, Dr. Berkovitz, is really to hear about the neuroscience side of things. And first, I would like to ask you, maybe you could just say briefly, why is neuroscience interested in meditation or mindfulness? And then what has neuroscience discovered up to this point? And then maybe we could actually go into what you've been researching.
So these are very two big questions, but I guess you want to have the brief answer. So starting with the first one, why look at the brain? I think that the moment that serious research has started looking into what's going on in the brain, which is, I think, around 2000, it's only about 20 years, 2 decades that this has been going on, and this has really changed the map of the whole thing. It started entering really seriously into clinical setups, really seriously into education setups. So the basic science of what's going on in the brain, this is fun for a couple of weirdos, that I'm one of those, but the implications to life, to real life, like medicine and psychotherapy and education, needs the backup of serious basic science.
Right. For it to be accepted by the mainstream, it has to have that kind of credibility through empirical evidence in a way.
Yes, and this was the breakthrough of the Mind and Life Research Institute,
Right.
that funded and started very serious meditation. Up until that time, this studying meditation was together with altered states, hypnosis, drugs, and other things that were really, really at the background of real science, and then
Right.
entering into the mainstream with very high-level publications about what's going on in the emotional regulation, attention, and this is taking me to the second question.
Right.
What are the findings? Yes.
Yeah.
So the main findings, if I can sum up very briefly what's been going on in these 2 decades, is that we can arrange findings, I think, in three levels that are somewhat interconnected. I think that the first, or maybe even four, one level that has been shown to have that meditation has a marked effect on the health and the body, like lowering blood pressure and lowering stress, what is being called the stress response. So this is one thing.
So on actual physical health.
Physical health,
Right.
yes. And improving immune system functioning. And I think that maybe this was historically a first level. And then
historically in the neuroscience history in the last 20 years?
And in the biology of
Okay.
meditation,
Yeah.
it's not only about the brain, it's also about the body.
Right.
So I think that maybe this relaxation response was even maybe a decade before the brain, what's going on in the brain. And then the neuroscience, I can say that the first two levels that were really backed up by science was the enhancing the attentional system, which is not a one thing, it's three different systems, but in general, there is alerting and orienting and different stuff and different ways to look at it. But in general, meditation enhances the ability to focus and to sustain attention.
So first was physical health. The second was actually our ability to pay attention to life, whatever, becomes enhanced.
Yes, yes.
To pay attention. To pay attention at the five senses, or also to pay attention to our internal process as well, the mind.
Five senses.
Okay.
So the studies in the lab would go to visual attention, auditory attention.
Okay.
I think maybe only now I'm familiar of a novel study looking at attention to internal life.
Right.
Okay, but just showing that the ability to control the system of attention, to shift it, that it goes to where I want and it is not being pulled by stimuli and spread all over the place. So it doesn't really matter what is the focus, your ability to be with the chosen focus.
Right.
And to shift it as you want and to sustain it, this is what enhances.
Right.
So this is the level of attention. The next level that was the focus of the research for a couple of years was emotion regulation.
Interesting.
And each one of those is not finished. Research is still going on. I'm just showing the steps, what was established. So emotion regulation, showing that people that meditate can maintain and their emotions and experience less anxiety, and in the level of the brain have less activity in the amygdala, which is a little structure that is screaming, fear and rage.
Yeah, the basic fight, flight, freeze, it gets triggered right away, and we approach, we avoid, or we space out.
So yes, this is the last level of the sympathetic response that goes to stress, like you just said, fight, flight, or freeze, and showing that also other studies looked at physiology of the sympathetic. It's not only about the brain; it can also be measured by heart rate variability, for example.
Right. Right. So at this third level, with the amygdala, the practice of mindfulness or meditation increases the threshold or decreases the threshold of the amygdala, triggering of the amygdala.
Increases.
Increases
yes,
it.
So,
right.
Yes. So it will be just less reactive.
Right.
Of course, the setup, it's not a real life. People just hear screamings or look at terrible movies, things like that. This is the lab setup, but definitely compared to controls and even to novices in meditation, they have a lower response.
Right. And I think for the average meditator, just going into daily life with a car coming down the street or your child reaching for something dangerous, and we all experience, the amygdala when it kicks in. Hopefully we experience, and certainly we can notice how mindfulness gives us a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more agility in how to work mindfully in so-called threat situations, or what would be perceived as a threat situation.
And also it shows that the bottom up, the automatic response is lowering, giving rise to more top-down executive function.
I love it.
Yes.
So the bottom up, when you say the bottom up, that would be more of our instinctual biological drives.
Yes, the sympathetic response, flight, fight, or freeze.
Okay.
Amygdala, this is all happening very fast, very automatic, and then you act out on it.
And when you say top down, are you talking about cognitive functions, or are you talking about that place of choice?
when I say top down, I mean the frontal lobes that host a whole range of executive functions, including inhibition, including the ability to plan our response and to hold the situation without immediately acting. So when the meditation wants to take us away from an automatic response to creating a space for another type of selecting our response. So this would be the executive functioning, which definitely has been shown, these regions have been shown to be more active or more connected in meditators.
And when you say those regions, like with an fMRI scanning, you see there's more activity in these brain in this section of the brain, area of the brain, than let's say more in the more kind of the reptilian brain, the bottom up parts of the brain.
Exactly.
Got it.
So this was the second, maybe already the third level, taking physiology into consideration. And then I would say that the most recent level of discussion in neuroscience about meditation is what it does to the self-awareness.
Right. And this is also some of the research that you're doing, no?
Exactly. And this can take us maybe to the next step, if I can also give a summary of what's going on in the field and then also talk a little bit about my research. But this is, the level of self-awareness. And all these levels might be interconnected because a shift in our self-awareness can definitely create a shift in the emotion regulation, and probably also the importance we give to different things. So it has a say about attention also. For example, attention is being given always very automatically to something that is concerned with the self. So hearing my name would actually wake somebody from sleep when other stimuli would not.
Interesting.
So this anything that has importance to the self would be given more weight in the attentional system. And if there is a shift in the self-awareness, it might be that less attention or different attention would be given to self-related stimuli.
Interesting. So for example, if you're in a foreign country, you're hearing your native tongue, whether it's Hebrew or English, whatever, and that would draw your attention. It kind of automatically draws your attention over all of the other cacophony. Or maybe hearing the voice, or especially the cry of your child, will suddenly draw your attention more than anything else. So the main concerns that the self identifies with, which is all pre-cognitive in a way. It's just kind of hardwired in there, or not hardwired, but it's built in.
Yes.
That actually draws our attention more.
Yes.
So, and then from a Buddhist point of view, or if we, because the Buddhism is all about this, the matter of the self and its liberation, which would be beyond self. Anything that would be part of our attention would be a place where we're identified. I mean, is that fair to say?
Not only identified, it can also be fear. For example, fear of death. It also has great importance to the self. So in experimental setups, when one is being exposed subliminally to threat of death, like words connected to death, then they would respond differently.
Right.
And it was shown that meditators would respond differently from other participants, so give less importance to the subliminal threat of death.
Okay, now, so I get that. So when with meditators, those things that usually call the attention of the mind, of the sense of self, they become relaxed a little bit. And what would be the benefits of that? I mean, it's an interesting phenomena, but...
The other side of that is that more attentional mash'abim, how would I say that?
Capacity, maybe?
Resources,
yeah.
Are being are available to what is actually going on around me, seeing things as they are and not as important they are to the self, being filtered all the time through
Right.
this filter.
Yes. So again, would you say that you mentioned that the executive functions of the brain have more capacity to sort out reality than more the instinctual parts of the brain?
I wouldn't say that this is the executive functioning. So exactly
Okay.
who does that in the brain, I think it's a different system. It's called the default system. Maybe we would have some time to talk about it. But I think that the gain of giving less importance to the self-related stimuli is that we have more resource to give to other stimuli that are not self-related, just world-related stimuli.
Okay.
Like other people suffering,
Right.
world beauty, whatever.
Creativity.
Okay.
All right. Good.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to place it, but I did see, even in my, I even have a paper on that meditators are more creative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe being able to think in a more open-minded way, yes.
And certainly,
It might be related to that,
well,
yes.
and certainly, I mean, because that brings to mind like problem solving or conflict resolution, these types of things that are so easy to go into the reactivity. If we, having the capacity of mindfulness to just kind of rest in, and at the same time hold that difficulty, hold the dysfunction, hold the problem, at the same time without reacting or collapsing into a duality, that actually helps the creative process. That actually helps the resolution come through. And this is part of what we're doing in the Aikido practice. There's a conflict. Two people come together in the same place at the same time. They can't fit in the same place at the same time. We create an inner capacity of mindfulness, and that allows for some different solution. In a way, there's the executive functioning, like you said, but then there's also that mysterious part that just creatively emerges as a resolution. So it's like a move into wholeness that can only come through mindfulness practice.
So this is very beautiful, what you're saying. And, the laboratory setup is very different.
Right.
You have been participating in one of those creative studies, and you were given a word and you had to come up with as much as possible different uses to that. So in general, meditators were able to come up with much more uses and very creative categories of uses, which is not the type of creativity of problem solving, but more of divergent thinking.
Yeah, right. Divergent thinking meaning diverging from what our normal mode of operation?
Exactly. And coming up with more and more distant from the usual possible uses for an object.
Right. So
this is the way to study it.
And there's always a sense of novelty, at least for the person who's experiencing it, as I'll just say a creative process arises or creative thought arises. Divergent thing, it's emerging in a way that's never been there before. I might be repeating something that somebody else already said, but for me, myself, it's an emergence that's actually novel. It's new.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. The originality score is also higher.
Right,
yes.
Right. Wow. Okay.
There was also, about this study, the creativity, there was also something very beautiful that only in the meditator groups, they came up with a new dimension. So, for example, if a word was given like a boot, what can you do with a boot? The very regular thing would be to run, to kick, to walk. But then meditators would come up with more creative categories, maybe to put inside a flower, or make out of it. But then a new level sometimes emerged. What can we do with several of them together? which for some reason it never occurred in the other group, of multiplying and thinking about it. Like it was a new level. It wasn't even in the question, but it happened several times with the meditators.
So it's like multidimensional, or it starts to make greater connections through the process.
Yes. And this is about all that I can say from my own experience on meditation and creativity.
Okay.
But others, the literature has been showing that it has a significant effect on divergent thinking, especially the mindfulness, not the open monitoring, not the focused attention type of meditation. This categorization is very clear in the literature.
Right. So it's the mindfulness-based meditation that is key to the research that you're doing.
That is key to the findings on creativity that I just mentioned.
Got it. So Aviva, what I would like to do is I'd like to maybe if you could speak about some of the most important or interesting findings that you've come up with in your specific research. But before doing so, I want to, there's always this problem we have because science, neuroscience or any science, is observing phenomena from the outside. Meditation is observing phenomena from the inside. So there's the objective view and there's the subjective view. And no matter how objective I detach, observe, no matter how objective my experience can be, there's always going to be a subjective interpretation of that. And that gap, science can't close that gap, religion, spirituality can't close that gap. That gap is always going to be there. So how does as a neuroscientist, how do you bridge that gap between what's truly objective, if there is such a thing, and any subjective interpretation we give to phenomena, to experience?
This is the huge topic of neurophenomenology. So Francisco Varela, who was the founder of the Mind and Life Institute and was a biologist and a mathematician and also a philosopher and also a practitioner. So he came up with this exactly the same question. How can we study consciousness just by looking at the brain, which is the objective part, but we have to also study the internal experience, yes, the phenomenology. So my study has been combining this phenomenology by interviewing people and looking at the brain. So for example, if I have a group of practitioners that I ask them to dissolve the sense of time. You were one of those people. And then I ask them, how was it for you to dissolve the sense of time? And they give me a verbal description. Mm-hmm. Then we have several judges who would pull the group into subgroups by the interview. Those that have a total dissolution, those that they didn't quite manage to do this, and something in between. Mm-hmm. And then by grouping them, we can go back to the brain and gain new understanding and new results that we wouldn't have gotten if we would just pull them all together as one group. So in subtle questions of consciousness, like the sense of space and time and self, it would be very beneficial to interview them. And another study that we just published last year was working with one very adept meditator on the sense of dissolving the boundaries of the body and the self. And by very deep phenomenological descriptions he was giving about what was going on in his experience when he kind of reduced until this sense of boundary disappeared, we were able to look at his brain at the same time with the MEG at Bar-Ilan and see exactly what brain region was reducing, and it turned out to be the temporoparietal junction that has to do with multisensory integration. So it was amazing to see that one can volitionally reduce the way his brain is combining the auditory, the interoceptive information to create a sense of this is my body, this is where my body is. And I think this maybe is the most beautiful thing that I can say, that we have been able to show that meditators, at least very adept ones, can volitionally not only reduce the sense of autobiographic self, but also really the embodied self. So enter into this state of dissolution. But I feel that I've jumped to the end without saying the beginning. So let me say something about self-awareness.
Okay.
And how can we go about studying this?
Right.
So the cognitive philosophy or philosophy of mind came up with many descriptions of the self and conceptualizations, but there is a conceptualization of the self that divides the self into two types that has been very fruitful in the collaborating with cognitive neuroscience. And this is the ancient division of William James between the me and the I. So there is an I that is momentary experience, like a subjective experience from moment to moment. It has no memory and maybe not even language. It's an embodied cognition. And then there is a me. The me, by William James, is my story, my narrative, the things that I know. It's a conceptual self, the personality.
Based on the past. Based on our past experience that we bring forward as a narration into the present moment. Oh, I see my phone. That phone belongs to me. Don't touch my phone.
But it's also my future.
We project it into the future. Yes. Right,
yes.
Of course.
So I'm dreaming based on, yes, I see myself at my personality at this moment based on what I still want to achieve, yes? And also about other people, how they see me. I know how they see me because I interact with them, and it's a self-image.
Right.
So these two types of self has been recently called by recent philosophers, for example, Sean Gallagher. It's been called the minimal self and the narrative self. So the minimal is the embodied self.
The I, as James said, the I.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The I would be the minimal, the embodied self.
And the me would be the narrative self.
Exactly.
And again, just to help, so the narrative self brings the story from the past, maybe projects it in the future, but it's not fully present in the moment.
It's never present in the moment.
It's never present. And the I, it only exists in the present moment, or the so-called embodied self, I believe you said?
Yes.
It's dropping in the moment, the narration. I don't say myself, oh, where's my glass of water? Or it's too hot in here. I don't say things like that. I'm just in the present moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And again, sorry, it's the embodied self and the narrative self, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And this conceptualization is very useful for neuroscience because in the last decade, people have been able to come up with two different brain networks that support each one of these types of self.
Interesting.
And even more interesting, generally, these two networks are anti-correlated, meaning that they never work together. It's either this one working or that one working.
So it's like a switch you turn off and you turn on. Wow.
You can either be in your body at this moment or be in your brain, in your image, which makes sense to meditators.
Sure.
And then you can start studying the brain and who is supporting the narrative self. It's a huge network, a beautiful network, symmetrical, that is so robust. It's in everybody's, from the age of 2 years old, you can start already see that, which is
in the brain?
Emerging.
Yeah, sorry. Please. It's a network in the brain or in the whole nervous system?
No, the cortex.
In the cortex, okay.
the cortex, yes. And it was discovered almost accidentally. So the fMRI is around for maybe 35 years, and the way people use the fMRI is to see what is active. The fMRI is looking at where blood with oxygen is coming when you do something. For example, when I see houses and when I see faces, different regions in the brain would light up. Oxygen would arrive with the blood to the face area or the house area. And now we know that the visual system is segregated into object and patterns, and everyone has his own little region that is responding to that. So for maybe a decade and a half, people were using the fMRI to see what lights up when we do something. But since it always has to compare to some kind of baseline because oxygen is coming, as opposed to when you didn't do the task, there was no oxygen there. So they always have to compare something.
Right.
And the comparison was some kind of rest, either just close your eyes or just stare at a little point at the center of the screen or something like that. And nobody was really interested in what is going on during the baseline, the comparison. Just the task was interesting until somebody came, Marcus Reichel, okay, at 2001, and he did a huge meta-analysis combining studies from all over the world, different labs, different tasks, and he was interested in what is going on when people don't do the task. And he was able to come up with a very robust network that was always active, no matter what the task was. When you were resting from the task, a certain network was suddenly active.
So even though when those tasks were turned off, something was actually on.
Exactly.
It wasn't just dead, it was just on. There was something on.
And this something was off when they were doing the task.
Interesting.
And he named this huge network the default network. So it was like a screensaver. It just turns on every time we don't do a task, an external task. And it was shown to be antagonistic with the externally related task network.
Right.
So anything that had to do with external attention and with sensory motor activities, so I'm sensing something and I'm pressing a button and I'm thinking about the task. All this was it was called the extrinsic system, as opposed to the default network.
Okay.
And then people asked, so what is the default network doing? Why is it active when people don't do anything in the fMRI? And then the next decade, studies came out showing that when we just mind wander, when we plan our future, when we recall our past, when we think about how other people see me, what is called theory of mind, all this activates the default network. And all this can be summed up as activities of the narrative self. So this default network supports the narrative self, and now we have a network that we can see, we can hypothesize, knowing that Buddhism and mindfulness-based practices are designed to take one to the realization, really embodied realization, that there is no such thing as a continuous self.
Sense of self, right.
Yes, so we can hypothesize that something would happen to the default network, and indeed, this is exactly what happens. So 2007 was the first paper showing that after MBSR, the 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction, people have less activity in the default network and enhanced activity in the insula. The insula is a huge area in the brain that is processing interoceptive information from the body. So there's a trade-off. We give less attention or maybe less ongoing activation to the narrative, to the story. At the same time, we give less brain processing resources to what's going on in my body. And then this was shown in another great publication, 2011, by Judson Brewer, that showed that during meditation, the default network is less active and less internally connected, because a network is always internally connected. All these regions, they talk to each other. So there is less internal connection and less activation altogether during meditation.
So without that connection, the brain is in much more of a flexible... When I hear the internal connection, I feel that it's, that let's say the brain or the neurons are networked in a very specific way and they function within that way. But as those connections release, then does that mean there's more potential in how the brain can function, or?
He didn't show only less connections within the default network. What you said would give the intuition of what does it mean. It means that it is less, I would say solidified, yes? All these regions, the medial prefrontal and the posterior cingulate, they talk with the hippocampus that has all the memories, and all this is really talking all the time together. So there's a loosening of the internal chattering in this system. But also what he showed in the same paper was that the executive function, the dorsolateral, another region, he is actually enhancing the connection with a region of the default network. These regions are usually not talking, so we are mind wandering about ourselves without being really aware of that, but enhancing the connection with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex would show that the executive functioning, the working memory, and actually the awareness to the experience is there. So what is left from the chattering of the default network is now under the metacognitive awareness of the executive function, which is usually not the case.
And then for a meditator, that would imply that, I mean, the sense of self recedes to the background or fades or dissolves, and there's like a flow of experience. It's happening moment by moment by moment, and yet there's still choice in there. There's still if you need to function. Forgive me if I'm using the word executive function wrong, but if you need to choose to get up and go to the toilet, or if you need to brush your teeth, or if you need to drink some water, you can still do that, and even more so.
I wouldn't say only choosing about what to do, but also just being aware of the content of what's going on in the default network. So, for example, one of the regions of the default network, the medial prefrontal cortex, is really related, has been shown to be related to thoughts that are related to myself now. So, for example, how am I performing now in the fMRI? Am I good? Can they see that I am a proficient meditator?
Okay.
Something like this would activate the medial.
Got it.
Another region, the posterior cingulate, would be active. And this has been shown by a neurophenomenological study. Also, the group of Judson Brewer, they actually used the signal from their own posterior cingulate while they were in the fMRI, and they told them, try to reduce it, and now try to enhance it.
So tell me what this is again. What is it that they're trying to reduce?
They took the signal from the posterior cingulate, which is one node from the default network.
But how would the subject identify that? Is it a certain thought? Is it a certain...
So this is exactly a beautiful example of how neurophenomenology can teach us something, because we don't know exactly what is the subjective experience that is related to the posterior cingulate. We just know it's a part of a big network.
Oh, I mean, so would I notice pressure there? Would I know? I mean, because as a meditator, we can have pressure in different parts of the brain.
Listen, they recorded it. There is a technology that very fast you can show the subject the activity in their own brain.
Okay.
So they look at that, and then they tell them, I don't know how.
It's like a neurofeedback. A neurofeedback.
It's a neurofeedback, exactly.
Okay.
So they look at that and they tell them, I don't know how to do it, but try to reduce this. And then when it was reduced, tell me, what did you do?
Okay.
So summing
That's
up
really
all those moments that they actually succeeded in reducing it, as opposed to the moments that they succeeded or they observed it to be enhanced, they came up with the understanding that the subjective experience of this exact region in the brain was holding on to. So when they were holding on to their own thought or experience, for example, being worried that they are not able to lower,
perform,
it would go, it would go up and up and up.
That's really interesting.
But when they were able to just let go of their own experience, it would drop down.
Wow.
So he came up with a series of more philosophical papers saying what exactly about the self is being processed in the posterior cingulate, and he came up with the idea that this is the identification with my own experience. The more I identify, it would work harder. So not every region would do the same. But they all talk to each other, yes? And the hippocampus is a region that is actually related to long-term memories, narrative memories, episodic memories about my life. So I can either use that or either think about myself at this moment and be less or more identified with that. And all this together creates a network. And going back to the executive functioning, by showing that this is active together with the default network, this means this is an outside observer. It's like a metacognitive process that is seeing the content of my thought, which is exactly what we do when we meditate.
Right.
We learn to bring more and more emphasis or weight to the observer than the content.
So this brings, So this kind of, because I want to respect your time, and also I have another interview to do today. So this brings us back to that same question, because we are in meditation, mindfulness. The practice is to detach and observe, and in that moment of detachment, let's say there's maybe one moment of pure objectivity, but very quickly it becomes subjective again, and then you detach and observe, and you reduce that again and again and again. So how would
that be seen in the brain?
Yeah, sure. How would that be seen objectively, empirically, from measuring from the outside?
Okay, so this comes up to the Weizmann Institute research I've done with Professor Rafi Malach, and you were also part of this. People were in the fMRI, and we wanted to see what's going on in the default, not while they are meditating, but just while they are living their own life, performing a task or just resting there with eyes closed, not meditating. And looking at the networks in the brain, they are fluctuating all the time. So if I said that these two big major networks, the default and the extrinsic, they kind of go counterbalance like this, it goes very fast, these fluctuations. So when you say I'm subjective, I'm objective, I'm subjective. So I look at it, but then I identify. But then I look at it and identify. Definitely the experience is shifting. We can measure for example, how did we call it? The variance of the signal. How variable would be the signal over, for example, 7 minutes of just lying there in the fMRI with eyes closed, not meditating. And
as a baseline.
As it's not even a baseline. We just want to see, yes, what is our default activation or variance? How noisy is it?
When we're not meditating.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Just when we just lie there. And in meditators, it was significantly quieter. Okay. It was more quiet. And during a task, it was a visually oriented task. Again, the default network that usually is jumping every time we don't do the task. And then we have to shut it up in order to do the task. In meditators, this whole dynamic was shifted. There was no default activation in the short moments in between the tasks. It was not turned on all the time, and they didn't have to turn it off. So their behavior in the task was higher performance, and the activation in the attention and visual regions that had to do with the task was stronger. This is what we said before about attention. Right. So more attention or importance was given to this boring stimuli on the screen, because there was no attention in the background trying all the time to go back to my...
It's not competing with any other stimuli.
Yes. Right. I was able to show and publish on the visual system. So I cannot, scientists, I cannot tell you, I didn't see a paper, but I believe that it will be in other modalities the same.
Well, listen, Aviva, so I want to respect your time, and we're kind of coming to the end here. Maybe you could tell us, what's promising about neuroscience research, or what big questions are left, or where are you going with your research, assuming that you're still doing this research?
Definitely, this is my life project. Yeah. So I'll tell you what is fascinating for me now. I'm very keen about this last level, what is called the self-awareness, so studying the self. And up until now, papers were accumulating to show that meditators have a less dominant narrative self-processing, a less strong default network activation. And this, since the default network overactivation was related with anxiety and with depression and different psychopathologies, being able to take a step away from maybe obsessive, compulsive, too much of a default network activation is very beneficial. And this, it has been called in psychology decentering.
Decentering. Interesting.
Just not putting myself in the center has a psychological beneficial effect, and this goes into the clinic, and this is one line of research.
It certainly has social benefits as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
In terms of application, it would go into, yes, definitely the clinic is the best place to go, PTSD, post-trauma, things like this. In terms of basic science, and basic science is first of all driven by pure curiosity, and then you can see what's applicable with that. In terms of basic science, I'm fascinated about the fact that meditators can volitionally manipulate their embodied self. And my next step is to ask, is this beneficial? Is this a kind of psychopathology like schizophrenics? They also have a dissolution of
they manipulate. Yeah, right. Sure, exactly.
But they cannot manipulate. For them, it's very rigid. They are being thrown from too strong boundaries to
Right.
no
To no
boundaries.
boundaries, right.
This also happens in post-trauma and depersonalization.
Right, yeah. And it creates a
So,
psychotic split in a way.
so the next step after, up until now, we have been able to show that with one very professional meditators. The next step would be to see if more meditators can do that, and then if the regular population can do that, can learn how to do that volitionally, and then to see what's the value of that. One area is to see if we reduce the sense of boundaries, do we have more empathy? Are we more to others? Are we more altruistic? So one way to look at that is to see what's the social benefit, if at all, of being able to do that. Another thing is to see if it's helpful in different psychopathologies that have a problem with the boundary, and learn how to volitionally manipulate that can be maybe beneficial for them. So this is where I'm at. Another place that I'm at, being at the education department faculty in the University of Haifa, is looking into interventions in schools. So for example, one of my research students now is looking at ADHD children from 9 to 12.
Yeah.
Looking at their brain before and after mindfulness intervention. And really, like a couple of days ago, I was just looking at very initial results showing that their frontoparietal alpha, it doesn't matter, it's a sign of executive functioning. It was much lower before the mindfulness than after.
Wow.
After it increased, and compared to a control group that was at the beginning much higher than them, they even had a higher score after the meditation compared to the control group. So this is something really about the application, but I'm very interested also in the underlying mechanism. Why is it so? Is it the default network that is too active in ADHD kids that is being controlled, or is it something else? Okay, so this is just an example of where I'm going, and I don't know exactly where is the field going.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about mindfulness and meditation. Well, even more specifically, mindfulness is that it is unlimited. It is really an open field, and it's not like, well, you can do it here, but you can't do it there. It's the applications are kind of endless, and it's beautiful to see that especially when there's positive results going into a field, an area, for example, like ADHD, that is incredibly beneficial and incredibly needs it very much. Well, Aviva, Dr. Aviva Berkovich-Ohana, I want to thank you very much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom, and I look forward to hearing more about the upcoming findings and research.
Thank you very much, and for your long-term participation in all my crazy projects.
Yeah, I love it. I love to be one of your lab rats. It's nice. And so, is there any place people can read your papers, or is there any place where everything is collected together, or?
Well, there is a website, my website, that you can go into that through the University of Haifa faculty members. And I don't know if it's 100% updated, but probably it was updated 1 or 2 years ago.
So we can find, maybe not the most recent papers, but we can find your past.
Yes, and definitely if someone is very interested, he can write to me in an email, and I'll show people, just use Google Scholar and write my name and mindfulness.
Okay,
it
great.
will just come up.
All right. So first, the University of Haifa .ed. What is the URL?
Exactly. Oh, I don't know. I have to open it up.
Sorry. Okay, so I'll find that and I'll attach it to this video.
Okay.
And you're in the faculty under your name.
I'm
right?
in the Faculty of Education.
Faculty of Education.
In the Safra Brain Research Center.
Okay.
And through each one of those, you can see my my page, and I will try to update it.
Great. And you said the other way is Google Scholar, Dr.
Yes.
Aviva Berkovich-Ohana. Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what's happening in the world of
Okay.
neuroscience
Thank
and
you so
meditation.
much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.